hopefully I can impart some of my knowledge about the Desoutter to you just now. I flew it for the very first time and landed 1 hour ago. So flew it for the first time this morning. I figured it'd be quite interesting to talk about my experiences this morning, what we do when we approach a new aircraft at the collection, and some of the qualities and the handling qualities, what it's actually like to fly this aeroplane. I'm not a terrific historian, so if you want to know the history of the Desoutter company, there are some excellent books in the shop. The collection guidebook will tell you all about it. Joking aside, it's a 1931 aeroplane, so it's nearly 80 years old. It was built by the Desoutter Aircraft Company of Croydon, and Richard Shuttleworth bought it originally to pick up parts for his sports cars from the Bentley factory. It was one of his original aeroplanes. So it's been here for an awfully long time. He raced the aeroplane in the King's Cup Air Races 1934, 33, 34. He made some pretty significant alterations, redesigned the tail section, put in a much larger engine, and the aircraft was kept here. It went on loan to a couple of museums around the UK, and then around 1985 time it was brought back here for an extensive rebuild and made back into an original Mark I Desoutter with the original engine and the original tailplane. It flew again for the first time in 1998. Turns out there are some quite clever things about the design of this aeroplane. If you think in the 30s, this was quite a radical design really, an enclosed cockpit monoplane. It's quite unusual. It was built really as an air taxi, so the pilot, sort of a single seat for the pilot in the front. You have to fold the back of the seat down to climb in, and it's at an angle, so it's a bit of you have to use some ropes to climb in and then fold the seat back up behind you, so it's a bit of a work of acrobatics to get into the aircraft, but great fun. And then there's 2 seats in the back for your passengers. The joke in the collection is it's built a little bit like a large wardrobe, so it's quite boxy, but it's really nice inside. The field of view afforded to the pilot is really quite restricted, especially when you're in a turn. You have an excellent view of where you've been, but not necessarily where you're going or want to go next. So turning corners needs a bit of planning. But it's excellent in a straight line. It gives the passengers, especially in the back, big windows. They've got a little skylight through the roof, through the wing section as well. The passengers get a really nice view of the countryside. So you can see it would have been quite an appealing aeroplane to fly in as a passenger. Some clever tricks. It's got wash in on the wing, so the outboard section is increased angle of attack than the inboard when you fly. But actually, the stalling and handling characteristics in the stall are really quite nice. It's not nearly as challenging as you might think. The aircraft has a Hermes engine, Cirrus Hermes engine, very similar to that fitted in the 60X Moth. Here we've got Richard Shuttleworth's Cirrus Moth. The undercarriage is very unusual. It sits on these big long stilts, and there's a really long travel. That's the kind of oleo just here. When you get airborne, the wheels kind of sink down almost under the aircraft. So when you come to land again, you sort of set the attitude that you were in at takeoff, and the wheels touch down quite a lot sooner than you'd expect because they're sort of hanging down in the breeze without the aircraft's weight on top of them. So it's an unusual undercarriage, very unusual indeed. Structurally, it's an unusual aeroplane too. The wing is not structurally collected to the fuselage. All of the load from the wings goes through the struts and braces here, and the fuselage is almost suspended under the wing. When Dodge Bailey, the chief pilot, took this aircraft flying for the first few times, they encountered some quite significant aileron flutter where the airflow and instability airflow starts to excite oscillations in the ailerons. It often is very destructive when that happens, but got away with it. It's got these lovely mass balances now you can see on the wingtips to alleviate that problem. The original design called for aileron control rods that are obviously very stiff. When Desoutter bought the design from the original designer, they replaced the rods with cables, which obviously can go slack and increase the likelihood of having slightly odd aeroelastic effects in the wing. So I said I'd talk a little bit about how we approach flying new aircraft today and what I went through this morning to take this flying for the first time. So it all starts with preparation and reading through the pilot's notes and the checklist and starting to understand a little bit about the aircraft systems, how it differs significantly from other aircraft of the period. So it's got a right-hand propeller, the engine and the prop go right-hand, so as compared to things that I fly very regularly, like the Chipmunk, the Tiger Moth, they go the other way. So your feet have to work in the opposite sense, the rudder, to keep the aircraft going straight. So little things like that become quite important. So reading through the notes, have a sit in the aircraft, work out how to get in and out, which is, in some of these older aeroplanes, is not necessarily all that simple. Familiarise yourself with the controls. Again, with early aircraft, they tend not to have very many. So this aircraft has a fuel tap, an elevator trim, stick, a few select instruments, and really that's about it. There's no flaps, there's no brakes. That's all you got. So once you've found those things, you're pretty much good to go. I then sat down over coffee with one of the other more experienced pilots that's flown this quite a few times, with Mark Sharp, and he's going to talk me through his experiences, some of the handling qualities of the aircraft, the unusual differences, and we talked through what we're going to go and do, and then I took the aircraft off on my own. So starting up the engine with ground crew in attendance, they prime the aircraft externally, so get the cylinders primed. Then it's a quick chat between pilot and ground crew, fuel on, throttle set, contact, prop swung, and she started first time. So that's always a nice thing. Quick warm up of the engine for a few minutes and kind of get used to the general ambiance of the aircraft with the engine running. Get the ground crewman to hold on to the tail while we do a quick run-up check to not quite full power, about 50%, or maybe 3/4 power, about 1600 RPM. Check the magneto drop on each side, check both sides of the ignition are working on the aircraft, and then we're ready to go. So taxi out to the runway. Again, keeping the ground crew guy, because this aircraft has no brakes, and the tail skid is not connected to the rudder at all. It's sort of semi-car string, so it's a bit of a shopping trolley. Like a lot of these early aircraft. So generally, here at Warden, with the aircraft that don't have brakes, we'll have a wing walker to help move the aircraft around on the ground. It's just not worth. It's easy to do. It's a bit labour intensive, but it's worth it. So we keep someone with us right until we're lined up on the runway, wave off the ground crew, and then once we clear takeoff, just smoothly opening the throttle, getting a feel for keeping the aircraft straight, and then once you're at full throttle, you can't quite see over the nose. If you look out to the side, you can see either side more or less straight ahead, but not quite. Then unweight the tail, get the aircraft into a sort of level attitude, and then things become quite a lot easier. The undercarriage is quite springy, so bounce along the runway, and then at about 50 miles an hour, just easing back on the stick, and she flies away really nicely. The engine's quite a low revving engine, so soon after takeoff, easing back on the power just a little bit once we're climbing away, check of the oil pressure, and off we go. And you get a lovely view of the countryside. It feels a bit like looking through a letterbox when the pilot's head is sort of here, so you've got this little letterbox to look through. And as I said before, as soon as you turn, the top wing blanks where you want to look. So before you start a turn, you have to sort of lift a wing, make sure there's nothing in the way, and then turn and get pointing the way you want to go. I took her up to about 2,000 feet over towards Cardington. Had a look at longitudinal handling, so handling and pitch. The trim's very powerful. There's plenty of trim authority, probably a bit too much if anything, but she handles nicely in pitch. She's very heavy in roll. Big thick wing, big fat cord on the wing as well, so lots of damping roll, and the control forces in roll really quite heavy, not very well matched to the pitch controls at all. If you think it's designed to fly A to B in a straight line, so that's probably not outrageous. It's not a fighter, it's not an agile fighter, it's a gentlemanly air carriage. So that's probably not unreasonable. I had a look at the stall. Stall's very benign, so just let the aircraft slow down, sort of simulated flying and approach, but at height. slow down to about 55 knots, 55 miles an hour, which is the approach speed for the aircraft, and then just put it to idle, simulate just holding it off in the flare, ready to land, and there's very little buffet for the aircraft. It doesn't really give you much warning that it's about to stall, other than the controls go a bit sloppy. It gets noticeably quiet, and then she just rolls off very gently, very benign stall. Slightly loaded, so pretend you're flying around the finals turn with a bit more lift from the wing. In a left-hand turn, she rolls off to the right in the stall, and in a right-hand turn, she rolls off to the left, and you can't ask for anything more than that. So it will naturally roll you away from the ground and keep you out of trouble. So it's really quite remarkable for something you think it's got wash-in in the wings, it's got high wing, big square fuselage. Actually, behaviour at low speed is really, really good. So that all makes this really quite a good aeroplane for taking Lord and Lady, whoever they might be, to go and land in a meadow outside their stately home. It'd be quite good for that. Steady heading side slip, so I looked at putting on rudder and putting her into a side slip, and again she's very benign, so that's important for controlling the aircraft in a crosswind. If you're trying to land in a crosswind, looking at how easy it is to apply rudder and get side slip going. Really quite nice, not much to say. Back here first of all for a practice forced landing. So power off, about 60 miles an hour in the glide. She glides for a long way. This aircraft is notorious among the collection pilots for landing long, so she glides very well, and it will float a long way if you're not absolutely on your threshold speed as you come over the hedge here. So quick go to a forced landing, couple more circuits for practice. Again, being caught out a little bit by the undercarriage that dangles down, so you touch the ground, the wheels start to spin up without any real weight on them, and you hear them touch down and start to rumble before you think you're going to, because they're hanging down that little bit further. Then into a quick practice display, 5 minutes of wing overs, and then another circuit to land back on. Sort of left with, so it's nearly an 80-year-old aeroplane. I think there's two Desouters, a Mark 1 and a Mark 2 remaining that are in airworthy condition. There's another one or two in museums around the world. There's only about 40 or 50 of these made in total. You sort of sit down and reflect on the experience of being allowed to fly something like this for the first time. It's a tremendous privilege. There's lots a modern pilot would say is wrong with this aeroplane. It's 80 years old. You know, it was early days, the early days of aviation still, and making light aircraft that are adaptable and flexible. There's lots to like about it, I think, and it's a fascinating aeroplane. To my mind, it's a classic Shuttleworth aeroplane. It really is. It's the only, you don't see these anywhere other than places like this. It's got lots of character. It's a bit quirky. It's a bit unusual. It's a really important piece of aviation heritage that's preserved at the Shuttleworth collection. And I hope you enjoy watching her fly a little bit later on. Has anybody got any questions?
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. So you talked about size.
No history. No history.
The rudder being taller than the fin almost gives the impression that designers had to extend it after they first built it.
Yeah, the question was the rudder's much taller than the fin, so did the designers have to extend it? Quite possibly. If you hold the pedals fixed in the aircraft, she's quite directionally stable. As soon as you take your feet off, she's sort of neutrally stable at best, and so that means practically you have to use the rudder all the time to keep the aircraft pointing straight. And you've got a slip ball in the cockpit to help you do that. You sort of notice, because you feel the side forces if you've got big side slip on. A lot of these aircraft tend to have big rudders to give you directional control for crosswind landings and handling, and quite small fins. Like, so if you look at the Tiger Moth, it's got a big over centre. A lot of the de Havilland designs have big over centre rudders and they're very small fin. It's quite. As well, hasn't she? Yeah. It's quite possible that they did extend it
that an NFS trained PPL with, say, 70 hours on moths and bluebirds, that sort of thing, could fly this aircraft for hire?
What, today?
No, back in
Back in
1930.
back in the 30s. Yeah, I think so. It's not an unreasonable task to ask a relatively low-time pilot to fly an aircraft like this. It sort of looks after you.
Yeah.
It's got quite nice handling. The tricky bit's always landing generally.
Yeah.
And the handling qualities in
But they have big grass
approach
airfields
configuration.
then, don't they?
Yeah,
So
I think
land into
it's
wind.
really quite a nice aeroplane for a low-time pilot. I think.
Just another quick one. As an
Of
air
course.
taxi, because NFS built a lot of these, in fact they became the agents and they wanted to use them as air taxis. Could this carry 3 adults with a couple of bags?
Two. I think two. The maximum all up weight's 1,900 pounds.
Right.
And it's about 1,700-ish with a single pilot. So two people and a bit of baggage. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Or 3 including the pilot. Yeah. So if you.
Just the fact that it has very long oleos, and as you say, it comes onto the wheels with no weight on, does that mean it's easier to do a smooth landing as it gradually absorbs?
It does. Yeah. If you do a wheeler and just put the main wheels on and then hold the tail off, it's very flattering.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can see it's got a huge stroke. So yeah, it would soak up bumps quite nicely. We've got very good smooth grass surface here. But yeah, I think. It's a good design for rough fields, definitely.
But it's better 3-wheelers or to wheel it on?
You always end up with a bit of a wheeler, even with if you're in the right attitude in this attitude, the main wheels will still touch down first. It's difficult to 3-point really well, but not impossible. Yeah.
Is there a chance to taxi on the ground with a moving?
Yeah, it's not too.
Without
You
outside help?
you can a bit. We tend not to here because there's not a huge amount of space. A lot of valuable aeroplanes around. We try to keep away from the runway as possible, especially while the display's on. So we'll generally taxi around with a wing walker. Yeah. But on a big grass airfield, yeah, you can move it around reasonably well. Reasonably well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.